Again, this diagram is drawn from this same article by Capon and Hannah, and it talks about the pathways between climate change and health, both direct and indirect. Now, I think what we often think about is that number one, that heat waves, floods, fires, storms, water shortages all have an impact on a community, on the social life of a community, on rural production, and in turn that had disrupted agricultural production, disrupted communities. There are health impacts, there are stress impacts, there are coronary heart disease impacts. So that's that direct impact of climate change. But the work that we are doing and that I am talking to is really around number 2 to 3, the indirect impacts of climate change. If you come down to changes to ecosystem structure and function at the bottom there, we're very interested in the way that prolonged drying in the Australian context, lack of water in the Australian context, is really having an impact on the soil quality, on the nutrient quality, on aquaculture quantities and qualities, on forest productivity, and the way that has flow-on effects to producer communities and onto health impacts. So we are very interested in the way that bloody hot climates, very little water, is having an impact on how much food we are producing and the quality of that food, and whether we have to import food. So this frames the research that we're doing on the relationship between climate change and health. Now, I'd just like to say something about the unsustainable nature of the food system, and along with that, the physical activity system. And rather pejoratively, I've called these industrial diets. So in the Australian context and in the OECD context more broadly, we are being fed diets that have high inputs of water, energy, and soil nutrients. We are fed diets that favour animal protein and intensively produced carbohydrates. Certainly at this foreign policy school in Dunedin, there was huge debate about the place of New Zealand's dairy industry, both for New Zealand's national economy, but in terms of feeding the world more generally. And yes, a very important source of nutrients, but what are the environmental externalities that are happening at it? And as somebody remarked, look, it's the most efficient dairy industry in the world. And then somebody else said, yes, but the very success of that industry has compromised, or is compromising, the environment, given that animals are big methane producers, big waste producers, etc. There is a huge tension there that New Zealand peoples, the government and community have to come to grips with. But we know that these industrial diets aren't healthy for us. We know that the another important source of our diet is the commercial food services sector, less and less cooking, home cooking, and more going to takeaways, going to the supermarket home meal replacement section. And those foods have lots of hidden things that we can't account for. And it's hard as a consumer to know what we're eating. Industrial diets are extremely truck and car dependent. We drive to the supermarkets, we drive through the food service sector outlets, and we even, in the Australian context, we all drive to the farmer's market. And industrial diets are riddled with health and nutrition claims, and what I'm calling their other commercial conventions like convenience. Convenience didn't drop out of the sky. It is a socially constructed notion that has been attached to products since the 1920s. Women in particular have been targeted. If you don't use the convenient approach, then you're not a sensible or worthy housewife. But this is where I hope I'm not going to confuse things too much by introducing physical activity, but as I say, I'm more and more convinced about how it's joined up with the food system. What are our dominant modes of getting around? It's automobility. It's not on our bikes or walking, but although I do acknowledge Wellington's very proud achievements as a walkable city. Labour-saving devices particularly targeted for women. You only have to talk to women in the 1950s and before to realise how much less labour women do have to expend in the household. Women and men together, young and old, we're in much more sedentary labour force routines. We have much more sedentary leisure time activities, screen-based, and it's through screen-based activities that we're actually exposed to an enormous amount of advertising for food, for cars, for alcohol. So leisure time and the possibilities to consume are ever present. There has been a huge disconnect between social and physical activity. Now we're active in the gym or on the sports field, but in interviews we've been conducting with what we call the Depression era generation, still the 80-year-olds are playing tennis. They're still going to dances, sometimes 3 times a week. Social and physical activity are bound up. So industrial physical activity disrupts the social, is what I would say, and it's not very active. It could be called inactive. And I used the term earlier about re-engineering. I don't want to appear that this is the nanny state talking. You know, here we are needing to re-engineer connections between sustainable food systems and sustainable physical activity systems. I want to say that this engineering between these two systems is happening every day. Every minute you see an advertisement that if you spend more at the supermarket, you can save on your petrol, and then if you spend more at the petrol station, you can get discounts at the supermarket. And we have created, through the petrol food shopper dockets, an engineered system of food provisioning, of mobility provisioning, that is toxic. And by the end of the talk, I want to say, really importantly, we need to take control of this engineered state of affairs and re-engineer it. And civic and urban agriculture, for me, offer an opportunity to do that.